Welcome to the May 2023 CIECA webinar, The Future of Automotive Technologies. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenter is Chris Chesney, VP of Training and Organizational Development with Repairify. With more than 50 years in the industry, Chris has been a master technician, shop owner, service advisor, technical and management educator with extensive experience in training. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenter. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the question panel on the webinar screen. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to CIECA for the opportunity to share with you my vision of the future of automotive technologies. I hope this is a meaningful broadcast and serves you to kind of not only understand where I think the industry is going, and will ultimately land, but give you the opportunity and insights on how you can stay abreast of all the changes that are happening in our industry. We're constantly bombarded every day with news about new technologies or the future, the near-term future of our industry, especially with respect to battery electric vehicles and the electrification of the fleet. But there are other technologies as well. So my goal today is to provide you with insights into the drivers of these technologies, the things that influence those drivers, so that you can gain the foundation of the why around some of these moves and changes in our industry. Many times I hear shop owners and technicians make the statement of, why do I have to deal with this? Why can't we go back to the good old days? Why do we have to have all these systems on board the vehicle? Why do we have all these safety systems? Why do I have to pre-scan? Why do I have to calibrate vehicles? Well, those are great questions, and there's reasons that drive those technologies to come to bear, and I hope to kind of give you that foundation as we build upon the whys, and then we'll share with you the near term and the long term future of our industry. So with that, let's go to today's focus topics, and we're going to start with kind of the current state of the automotive technology from a repair perspective. Everybody in this audience probably has some relationship to the repair side of the business. And when I talk about repair, I'm talking about both collision and mechanical. And you're going to see me wrap this session up with a challenge to you all. And I'm going to plant that early on in the presentation here and tell you that with respect to this audience, probably mostly collision. So I'm going to challenge you, the collision industry, it really needs to focus on the total vehicle, not just the body and paint. We're at a point in time in our industry where that is a requirement. The car doesn't know where it's at. And so we're going to begin with what the current state is, what the technologies are today, and what is in the process of being promoted and produced over the coming couple of years. And then we're going to talk about the near-term technologies that will really meet the current pressures of our society and the current administration, all the while comparing that to reality. I have an engineering background. As Paul mentioned, I've been in the industry over 50 years. This is my 52nd year in the industry. And I've served every position on the mechanical side. I have an engineering background, wanted to be an engineer, go to Detroit, design cars for Ford or GM. And then in college, took a field trip to SAE Congress in Detroit. At that time, it was held in January. They had a typical January day in Detroit, and this Kansas boy decided, nah, I'm not going to go to Detroit and work. But I've always had that engineer's mindset on the repair side as I entered the repair side of the industry. So I'm going to challenge some of the reasons we have the technology we have today and try to push us towards where we'll see the industry ultimately land because of facts and science. And then at the end of the day, we have to be able to service them and repair them. And we're going to land on a few slides at the end that challenge us with some of the service readiness issues that we have. And so there's a new term that we're going to challenge you to understand, and that's service ready. Service readiness is your ability to be prepared to repair, diagnose, and service the technologies that are on these vehicles before they arrive at your shop. All OEMs are challenged with being service ready, and service readiness is an OEM term. I'm known in the mechanical space as that service readiness guy because I speak to it all the time. And it's time for the collision industry to understand the value of service readiness, the reason you need to be service ready before it shows up, because you can't afford to waste time to learn about that technology after it arrives at your shop. You lose money at that point. So let's move into looking at the current state of the industry. So the driving factors for the technologies we service and repair really boil down to 4 areas. First is safety systems, motorist safety. The engineers are challenged to build a vehicle that is safe to drive, does not cause injuries, and that's why we see ADAS systems applied to the vehicles today in mass and growing every year. It's to save lives and prevent injuries. And then we bring in, because of that and the emissions side of the equation, which I'll talk to you in a second, we bring in the concept of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a major issue with the OEMs today. Vehicles are being stolen at an all-time rate, and the brand protection departments at each OEM are really stepping in and trying to make sure that their vehicles can't be stolen because they don't want to be on the news. Especially, they don't want to be on the news like Hyundai and Kia are today, at the rate their vehicles that don't have immobilizer systems on board are being stolen. And then we're going to talk a little bit about greenhouse gas emissions, or the greenhouse gas game, along with emissions such as CO and hydrocarbons and NOx. Those are kind of things, emissions of the past. Our focus today is fuel economy and reduction of CO2, and how that plays into the technology that we see, and how that's become a political football and goes back and forth with every change in administration, and will continue to do so. But you need to be aware of that so that you can understand how to be prepared to service these technologies as they show up at your shop. And then finally, the engineers are challenged to not only make them safe, make them secure, and make them meet all these emission standards, but they've got to make money doing so. And by the way, they've got to really run fast and perform great, right? So they're a profit center. They're a capitalistic organization that wants to make money doing this. So let's go to the next slide and look at the influencing factors around all of these driving factors. Motorist safety today is critical. The death rate increased for the first time in over a decade in 2020. And many people say, well, vehicle miles traveled were down. Yes, they were. But in 2020, people got out on the road and drove faster than ever, were reckless in their nature. And because of that, the accidents and the incidents were more severe. But that has not reduced significantly back to pre-COVID numbers over the last couple of years. Injuries have been significant over the last decade as well. And so NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration, is pressuring the OEMs to install safety systems to reduce those traffic death rates. And I will tell you that they're successful to this point to voluntarily get the participation of the OEMs in doing so. So automated emergency braking, which starting in September of 22, any vehicle built after that date is to be equipped with automated emergency braking. And the OEMs volunteered to do that without pressure from from NHTSA so that they could get it done their way and get it done in a scalable and affordable fashion. You'll see more technologies come along those lines because they don't want to revisit the TREAD Act, where TPMS came from, or the vehicle safety or vehicle stability control mandates that were made by NHTSA back in 2008. They don't want to have to be forced to the table. They want to volunteer to do that. So those will come down the pipe here shortly. And then cybersecurity, probably the top of the list right now for the OEMs because of brand impact that makes on their brand when their vehicles are easily stolen. So vehicle theft today is at an all-time high. It's higher than any time in the last 14 years. And the result of that, or the cause of that, is due to all the safety and emissions systems that we put on board the vehicle. We've created this really complex machine. In fact, the automobile today, the most common automobile off the showroom floor today, is the most complex machine on the planet. It has more processing power than Elon Musk's rockets. It has more processing power than the most sophisticated aircraft on the planet, the F-35, because of the diverse number of suppliers that you have to stitch all their systems together. The software on board requires 150 to 300 million lines of code to operate. And then within the next 5 to 10 years, Volkswagen predicts we'll have 1 billion lines of code on level 3 vehicles. And we're asking you to work on those vehicles. So because of those safety systems, we've created this complex machine that only the smart IT people or hackers can activate or influence or repair. And because of that, hackers are out there making their way into these automobiles at a rapid rate. And the example I show you on the page, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that's a JBL Bluetooth speaker that you can plug in, charge it up, and you can connect your iPhone to it and play music. Well, thieves are taking that device and adding a chip or two and programming it with some firmware that allows them to attach a cable that you see there. It's a USB cable or a USB-C cable on one end, and there's 2 small pins on the other where they can walk up to a hybrid vehicle from Toyota or a non-hybrid. It could be a Highlander, it could be a RAV4, it could be a Sequoia. They can pull down the front bumper cover or the inner fender. They can reach up inside to the back of the headlight module, which is now an adaptive headlight module, and they can breach the CAN bus behind the firewall and inject a signal that tells the immobilizer system it's okay to start the car. It can also tell the system it's okay to unlock the car, and the thief can then unplug, open the door, get in the car, push the button, and drive away. And that can happen in less than 2 minutes. This is called CAN injection. It's relatively new. It's becoming very common. Search YouTube, you'll find videos of people actually doing it. At the same time, I'm a board member of NASTF, the National Automotive Service Task Force, and we are seeing vehicle security professionals. These are bonded people that are licensed to do locksmith work or security work on vehicles. You may have LSID holders in your business. And what we're seeing today is an example on the screen of locksmiths and VSP professionals being hijacked, shot at, their vehicles being stolen so that the thieves can get access to the scan tool technology to be able to cut new keys, program key fobs, and steal vehicles. So what does that influencing factor say on the security side? We're going to see what's going to happen in the very near future that's going to be impacting your shop in a very significant way. And then we look at the greenhouse gas game. GHG game is really CO2 reduction, which the only way you produce CO2 in an automobile is to burn gasoline. So it's a fuel economy issue. So when we look at the greenhouse gas game, you're going to hear it in two different formats. One, you're going to hear it from the context of clean energy in the way of a net zero program, or from the standpoint of becoming carbon neutral. They're really the same thing. Net zero emissions or net zero CO2 really means that we're reducing as much as we're producing. In other words, we're not adding any more into the environment, any more CO2 into the atmosphere than we're taking out. So if we are producing 100 tons of CO2, we've got to take out 100 tons of CO2. If we're taking out 100 tons of CO2, it's okay to put back 100 tons. They'd rather us not, but that's really the end game that probably makes the most sense. When we get into carbon neutrality, you start hearing about the credits, the carbon credits, and that gamesmanship around that. And that's really for every ton of CO2 that you reduce or invest in reducing, you get a carbon credit. Well, what does that mean? Well, here's a real simple example. If you invest in planting trees in a forest, if you invest enough dollars to plant trees that will produce a ton of CO2, you'll receive a carbon credit. It's a shell game. It's not really reducing if somebody doesn't go plant those trees. So really net zero is the game that we're after. So let's look at another part of this influencing factor around fuel economy. In the right-hand side, you see the fuel economy standard that was set in the Obama administration to achieve 54.5 miles per gallon by model year 2025. And that was kind of stalled by the Trump administration and pushed back on because it's a pretty significant standard to try to hit. At the same time, recently, the Biden administration pushed a big change in fuel economy standard that requires the standard to be achieved by 2026 or 2027 at 53.5 miles per gallon across light-duty cars and light-duty trucks. Cars have to be just short of 60 miles per gallon and light-duty trucks just over 42 miles per gallon. Think about what your car gets today. That's 4 years away. Is that possible? Is that probable? The reason that stance was taken is to push battery electric vehicles. Now, we move to California, and the chart on the left, you see the mandates that California have. They have in statute in the mid-70s that they were going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So in 1996, they launched OBD. Many of you call that OBD2. Okay, there was really no OBD2 because there was no OBD1. So the federal mandate of onboard diagnostics was born out of the California Air Resource Board and the mandate for California to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, improve their fuel economy by 2020 to 1990 standards. So they need to reduce their CO2 to 1990 standards or levels by 2020. They actually achieved that in 2016. Yay. But look at the chart. They're way off track now because they don't have enough electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles in their fleet yet to achieve the regulatory standards that their legislature passed in the early 2000s that require them to be at 40% of 1990 standards by 2030 and 80% of 1990 standards by 2050. So major changes have to happen. It's the law in California that these things happen, and there are 6 other states that have adopted and automatically adopt that standard. Anytime California makes a change, Washington, Oregon, and the Northeast shed, states in the Northeast New England area, adopt those standards. So what does that mean for all of us? Well, here's what's happening. The current administration has a series of goals with respect to global warming or greenhouse gas emissions. It has to become carbon neutral by 2050, to stop selling gas and diesel vehicles by 2035, and for half the vehicle sales to be electric by 2030. And that has to happen to enable the other two goals to happen. Let's look at that compared to the European Union. EU has the same carbon neutral goal by 2050. They also have a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to California's 40% reduction. And they also have a ban on ICE-produced or ICE-powered vehicles by 2035. But in the last 2 to 3 weeks, that's been rescinded, and you'll be able to produce ICE vehicles, but you have to fuel them with greenhouse gas or CO2 neutral fuels. That means biofuels, that means synthetic fuels, which are extremely expensive in Europe, $14, $15 per gallon equivalent US. So what does that tell us? Well, how are they going to achieve that? I talked about BEVs or the electrification of the fleet. I think we hear that more than anything from politicians, from marketing groups, from the OEMs who are jumping on board, because if the current administration gets its way and stays in place and these standards need to be met, then they have to jump on board now and have investment in BEV technology. But they say electrification, which is not just BEV, it's hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, extended range electric vehicles, which are really off the table. That was the Chevy Volt. That's where we have an engine on board to charge the battery. We're still driving off the battery. Battery electric vehicles are part of that as well, but don't forget fuel cell electric vehicles. So you'll notice in the left-hand column, I have those shaded in different colors. Those items shaded in red, I call transition technologies and will not survive the next decade or two when we start to land on multiple solutions in our country that are segmented or offered by region, depending on the needs of the region of the country. In other words, we're not going to have BEVs in every county of the country. It's just not possible. We can't have them all by 2030 because it's not possible. We have 300 million ICE-powered vehicles on the road today. They aren't going away in 20 years. So that's not possible. So what is the deal with the green acronyms then? The high efficiency ICE engine, plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles, and fuel cell vehicles. Well, I believe those are the solutions that we'll see for the next 2 decades. And let's talk about ICE. The picture in the upper left-hand corner is a Toyota 2-liter engine that is the most thermally efficient internal combustion engine in production today. Its thermal efficiency is 41%. In other words, it converts its energy that we have in the fuel. 41% of it is used to drive the car. The rest of it is offloaded in heat, either in the cooling system or the exhaust. The typical ICE engine in the cars that you're driving today are around 15 to 20% efficient. The most efficient ICE engine on the planet is a Formula One engine. And if anybody wants to wager to guess what that is, I'll break the tie. The most efficient engine today is at 52% thermal efficiency. And that is fantastic, but it also tells us the ICE engine is not dead. So the ICE engine coupled with the plug-in hybrid is probably going to be the most common denominator. But then you're going to see things like hydrogen ICE. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is a Cummins 6.7-liter hydrogen-powered internal combustion engine. It's a diesel platform converted to hydrogen. Very well suited for medium and heavy-duty applications with steady state, full load opportunities. And then at the bottom, we have the definitions of all the different EV vehicles. So those are the power source choices we have today. How are we going to apply those? Well, what's the most common thing we see today? Everybody's focused on BEVs. BEV, BEV, BEV. Well, that's not the thing that we're going to see down the pipe everywhere, but that's the focus. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You see a Tesla on the left, you see a Chevy Bolt on the right. Let's talk about the next opportunity. Don't forget about the hybrids. The Prius at the top, brand new Prius. I think they actually did a good job on this one. Or the Santa Fe at the bottom. These are plug-in hybrids that give you extended range. So they don't have a big battery, they have a smaller battery. So what does that really mean in the entire equation of greenhouse gas emissions? And I'm going down this path because it's important for you to understand the why. So if we consider greenhouse gas emissions from a global perspective, we put a big box around the Earth, and we're trying to consider all the greenhouse gas emissions, the CO2 in the atmosphere. The more CO2, the hotter the Earth gets. That's the theory, right? So we measure the total CO2 of the Earth. Yet when we measure the emissions of a vehicle, we stick a probe in the tailpipe or a hose over the tailpipe when we measure the CO2 coming out of the tailpipe. And when we compare the internal combustion engine vehicle to the electric vehicle, we don't see any emissions from the electric vehicle. So I'm going to create an analogy. And these slides are from Dr. Graham Conway, who is the principal engineer at CIECAST, the Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. He's part of their low carbon project. And he gave this presentation in a TED Talk. And I met Dr. Conway, I spent time at CIECAST, and I've had conversations around this, and it's the most clear picture of the why of where we're going to end up. So let's compare a horse to a Corvette, okay? A horse produces CO2, a Corvette produces CO2. If I was to drive or ride these modes of transportation 5 miles, which one would produce the most CO2? The answer might astonish you. The horse would produce significantly more CO2 than the vet. So the answer is, let's just shoot all the horses and drive Corvettes, right? No, that's not the answer. The question is, how is the CO2 produced and recycled or mitigated in each mode of transportation? A horse eats grass to fuel itself. It runs and produces CO by breathing. The CO2 is recycled, absorbed by the grass, which grows and feeds the horse. So it's a closed loop. Whereas the car, we mine the fuel out of the ground, we burn the fuel, and the CO2 is put in the atmosphere and adds to the inventory of CO2 around our planet. That's open loop. So when we consider what that looks like, if we look at the electric vehicle and we put a box around it, it has no emissions. But if we take and put the box around the whole ecosystem of mining the raw materials for lithium, and folks, it's not a bunch of African kids in a mine shoveling dirt. You're thinking Indiana Jones or whatever movie you want to watch. That's not how lithium is produced. Lithium is produced in evaporation ponds, and it's also mined and produced by raw materials. But you're going to see the Salton Sea in California be one of the lithium producing areas of the country or the world that produces probably 40–50% of the inventory that the world needs and everything that we need in the US in a short period of time. And it's not a bunch of kids digging ore out of mine, but it does take CO2 to produce, and it takes CO2 to charge, to create the electricity to charge it. So when we look at that overall CO2 impact, we need to consider how that compares to an ICE engine. So if I have an electric vehicle and compare it to an ICE vehicle, I can believe that an electric vehicle is more efficient than a conventional ICE vehicle. Everybody agrees with that. But that's not how the vehicle is built. The vehicle is built up front with a CO2 penalty. And the conventional ICE vehicle has a typical CO2 penalty of about 5 tons of CO2 on the showroom floor. Whereas an electric vehicle like a Leaf, the early Leafs, had double that, around 12 to 13 tons of CO2 penalty before it was sold. And then you get into the vehicles like the electric vehicles that have the same range as an ICE vehicle of 400 miles, let's say. And in that case, an electric vehicle with the same range as an ICE vehicle, it has 5 times the CO2 penalty as a conventional vehicle. So I have to drive that electric vehicle a long ways to offset the CO2 that I had when I was built to be equivalent to a gas-powered vehicle. But wait, there's more. Bring in the hybrid. And the hybrid has less of a CO2 penalty because it has a smaller battery. And so it starts out closer to on par with an ICE vehicle, and it exceeds the CO2 penalty of an electric vehicle. In fact, before that electric vehicle is on par with a hybrid as far as greenhouse gas emissions, you have to drive the electric vehicle 450,000 miles. So what does that tell us? Well, at the end of the day, until we get renewable energy, until we can build a car without a CO2 penalty, until we can generate fuel without a CO2 penalty, we're going to be creating CO2. So what that really means is this. Dr. Conway put it best. Today, we are decades away from having enough renewable energy to offset the CO2 produced in the manufacture of electric vehicles. So the electric vehicle is nothing more than a shift in CO2. We're shifting the CO2 production from electric power to transportation. And that's all we're doing. So today, transportation, they say, this is the EPA, says that 28% of our CO2 is produced through transportation. The automobile and the light duty vehicle, which most of us service, only produces 14% of that CO2. So when we consider that, and we consider that the electric power that we need to expand to power the electric vehicle is going to just shift that transportation part, that 14%, to the electric power side of the equation. We're still going to be producing CO2. As the population grows, we're still going to be producing the same CO2 volume. So at the end of the day, what does that mean? Well, we've got technologies that we're playing against each other. And here's what I project. I feel like I'm deja vu all over again. Back when I was in high school, when we were arguing VHS and Betamax, or 8-track tape and cassette, and somebody's going to win, but it's more difficult to predict because there's more than two players in this game. And how long is it going to take? Which administration is in office? Will the consumers buy the battery electric vehicle or the hybrids? Which battery technology wins? Lithium isn't the only answer. There's sodium, there's solid state, there's air, there's all sorts of technologies. When was the last time, how many of you still have your CD collection? When was the last time you could go buy a CD for music or DVD for a movie? You go to Redbox, but most of it you stream today. So all of these technologies continue to advance, and none of them scale quickly if there's major competition in the market. The chart you see on the screen is the diffusion of innovation curve. That's what technologists use to predict when their technology will scale. That means it becomes readily accepted. It will sell at a rapid rate. If you remember when first time you saw an Apple smartphone and you saw the icons on the phone, it was different than my flip phone. It didn't have buttons. I remember that. How quickly did Apple scale the smartphone? It's the standard in the industry. And smartphones really are at scale, not necessarily just Apple. It takes 17% of the market of the vehicles in operation to scale. So today, if we hit our targets that the administration projects, any scientist projects, that we need to get to by 2030, 2035, at that point in time, we'll still only be 8% of the vehicles in operation will be electric. So the good news is that you'll be servicing the vehicles that you've been servicing for many years to come. So let's take a look at what that means. Here's my projection or prediction about where these technologies land and how they'll be adopted. And this is based on research. It's based on conversations I've had with environmental study groups, with state agencies, with the EPA, with the California Air Resource Board. And here's how I think it plays out. On the West Coast, you're going to see BEVs in those metro areas that are very dense. Southern California, the Bay Area, Portland, Seattle. The majority of those vehicles will be battery electric vehicles, supplemented by plug-in hybrids and fuel cell electric vehicles. And then we're going to see the medium density areas like Denver, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Dallas, Houston, those areas that have rural areas around them. They're going to be serviced by plug-in hybrids, fuel cell vehicles with some ICE and probably some mild HEVs, which are belt-driven small microcars that are used in those areas. The reason behind all that, there's no infrastructure to support battery electric vehicles or hydrogen yet today. Then in the rural areas, those white areas, big, expansive white areas, you're going to see ICE, you're going to see diesel vehicles, you're going to see hybrids, you're going to see plug-in hybrids grow, you're going to see a few hydrogen ICE vehicles for medium and heavy duty, but the majority of what you're going to see is what you see today. They'll just be more efficient. You're going to see 50% thermal efficient ICE engines applied to a Prius with Toyota hybrid technology that gets 75 miles per gallon. That's what you're going to see, and that's traditional technology that we can service today. And that will morph as we move through the decades and the population shifts, et cetera. So when we consider all of that information, what are the long-term solutions? Well, the future state of propulsion, I believe, is fuel cell. I believe in certain areas of the country, battery electric is still going to be a dominant product, because in those major dense metro areas, as a transition technology, it has implanted itself as a scaled product, and it will be difficult to supplant that. But do not be fooled by comments by Toyota saying that they're not going to invest in battery electric technology, that everything is hydrogen. They have a battery electric project. They have hydrogen projects. They have all sorts of different projects, including hydrogen internal combustion engine projects. All the major manufacturers have these projects, whether they're public or not. The technology you see in the top picture is a BMW using a Toyota licensed fuel cell that is powered by two 10,000 PSI containers of hydrogen. That hydrogen, being the most abundant element on Earth, has to be produced. You just don't go out and fill it up out of a refilling station like you see in the bottom left-hand corner. That has to be produced. The most common way to produce hydrogen is either steam methane reforming, which really takes the pressure and temperature to heat up natural gas and extract the hydrogen from that natural gas. That creates greenhouse gas. Or it's electrolysis, where we take, you probably did this in chemistry class in high school, where we take water and through electrolysis, we extract the hydrogen ions from the water. But that takes power to do, that takes electricity to do. And until we get renewable forms of electricity, that's not a viable way of creating hydrogen. So hydrogen still has an infrastructure problem. We've got to create it, we've got to haul it, we've got to store it, and then sell it. So the challenges are, how do we do all of that without creating or adding to the inventory of greenhouse gases around our planet? Well, let's look at some future state propulsion technologies, or fuel or energy technologies, if you will, that are in play. I'm a little bit enamored by this company. I've been following plasma kinetics for the last 5 years. This is a technology that was founded 15 years ago. It was suppressed for 10 years, 10 to 12 years by the Department of Defense, because they feared that if it got in the hands of our enemies, it would be a significant risk to our national security. And this technology is extremely cool. So imagine an 8-track tape deck or a cassette tape deck that has a thin film, and you kind of see that film, gold film on the screen there. This film is multiple layers at nano levels, very, very fine layers of film that are based with magnesium. And magnesium has the attribute of being able to attract hydrogen ions. And because we can do that, we expose that film in a smokestack, or the flue gases coming out of your natural gas heater in your house, or through wind or solar farms and electrolysis, water treatment plants, biofarms. All those off gases have hydrogen in them. And you can expose it under ambient temperatures and ambient pressures, and will it naturally absorb that hydrogen onto the film. It's almost too good to be true. And it stores it there, it absorbs it, stores it, and will release it with no greenhouse gas penalty, no energy needed. It's released when you apply light to it. So they shine a laser across that film and it releases free hydrogen that can power a fuel cell. It's totally inert. It's not under pressure. It can be transported with your bread. You can pick it up at 7-Eleven with your groceries and exchange your old one so they can recycle it. Or you can go to a gas station and plug in a device to recharge it in 5 to 15, 20 minutes, depending on how big a device you have on board. That's the future that we'll see within the next couple of decades, 2 to 3 decades, as far as potential propulsion systems or fuel systems. So, okay, that's fuel. What about safety? The number one question I get asked about ADAS and that technology is, are these vehicles ever going to calibrate themselves? No, probably not. But how about if we got down to 1 or 2 sensors on the vehicle that can cover everything that we do today with the dozens of sensors that we have on board? So here's a technology, the Lundberg lens. This is loonwave.com if you want to go look at them. You can see the spherical ball in the upper picture. That's the lens or the radar sensor. And it can see today at 180 degrees, both x-axis and y-axis as well as vertical. And it can see further than anything currently. It can see totally 180 degrees. So you put 2 on the vehicle, you can see clear around the vehicle with 2 radar sensors. There's other technologies. I just chose this to make a point that technology and advancements in technology are going to grow and continue to grow. And there's not any one vision that I can give you except to tell you that if you can't fix the car in your bay today, you're not going to be able to fix the car in your bay tomorrow. And I'm planting that seed, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Future state equipment technologies are constantly going to grow. Are you going to have access? Yes. Is the OE tool going to be the gold standard? Yes. But what about the changes near term? I'm making you aware, because I sit on the NASDAQ board, that in the very near future, aftermarket scan tools are going to be required to integrate with the secure data release model that allows the licensed technician, a vehicle security professional, to log into that aftermarket tool so that they can reach out into the secure data release model to access the PIN codes, the software, so that they can duplicate keys, program key fobs, initialize or program immobilizer controllers. Through that agreed upon NASTEP process, all the OEMs are agreeing to do that, and it's requiring the aftermarket to come alongside that. I think that's a great thing. You need to be aware of it so you're not freaking out when aftermarket tools that you might own add security, add logins, add requirements to be connected to the internet, those sorts of things. Things are going to continue to change. That's one that's coming very soon. So let's talk about the service readiness challenges over the next few minutes as I wrap this up. Some of the things that we're going to be challenged with in the collision side is dealing with that monster on the left. We do that today. That's a vehicle wiring harness from a typical vehicle. Anybody want to gauge the average weight of a vehicle harness? That vehicle harness is an average harness and it weighs almost 200 pounds. That's weight. To increase the fuel economy of a vehicle, we not only use technology, but if we can pull weight out of the vehicle, that's free fuel economy. But that harness is going to be reduced in size by more neural or rural networks or zonal networks, getting to the point where we have a central network that deals with multiple modules that control regional areas of the vehicle. And so when you get hit in the right front, in this vehicle on the right, you're going to be dealing with that right front zone gateway and the sensors and the wiring around that. In other words, it's going to get more complex, yet it's going to be more simple. And I say that because it's imperative that we consider today servicing the entire vehicle, not just the body and paint. The things you do every day on the collision side, collision damage is changing, or collision damage is imperative that you stay up to speed on that technology, body technology, metallurgy, bonding and adhesion technologies, changing every day, every year. That's not going to stop. As long as there's weight in that thing, they're going to manipulate it until they can make it lighter. As long as there's manufacturing opportunities to make pieces in one piece, Tesla's pioneering the gigapress, which takes the whole rear bottom of that unibody and makes it in one stamp. You're going to see those advances of technology. That's not going to change. You've got to stay up with it. Then there's the challenge from a service perspective of discipline, service discipline. And that points directly to the way we operate our businesses. And this is the same presentation I've given. I've used this slide numerous times on the mechanical side. And this is asking everybody to look in the mirror. Today, we pay technicians to skip steps. We accept condensed processes. We let them get by with, this is a faster way to do it. I'm not going to follow every step of the OE process. I'm going to skip this step because I don't think it makes sense. Advanced technologies demand that we adhere to OEM process, and we've got to keep in mind the motorist is paying for this discipline. So we need to be disciplined to follow OEM process and procedure to create a safe and proper repair. I preach that to the mechanical side. I'm preaching it on the OE side. There are others, peers of mine, that will stand beside me and make these same statements. That is not going to ever change. In fact, it becomes more critical. So finally, we get to the last challenge, and that's a learning challenge. That's not a picture of my mom. I'm going to explain this young lady and how she changed my life. The biggest learning challenge we have in our industry today is technical reading skills and the inability to read with purpose, not just read and follow instruction, but to read with purpose. Technical reading skills is asking questions of the problem and reading to find the answer, not reading to read every word in the book or the service manual, but reading to find that answer. It takes discipline to do that. It takes process to do that. And the problem is we have no standard of education and an antiquated education model. So the people that you're trying to hire aren't well equipped with technical reading skills and discipline. So we may need to change our hiring practices to affect that. So when we talk about those things, the lady in the right is Evelyn Wood. She changed my life in the 8th grade. I took an Evelyn Wood speed reading and learning comprehension course in 8th grade. Now, if you're Cheech and Chong fans, they made fun of Evelyn with a routine that I could probably recite, but I won't due to time. But Evelyn Wood taught me that I knew how to and had the ability to read with purpose. She just illustrated it for me and optimized it for me. So learning how to read technically is possible. We can teach the industry how to do that. You've got to join in with us at Repairify Institute or with ICAR or others and help us push this kind of training out to your folks so we can measure and we can move that skill. So what are the solutions? Well, the collision repair industry needs to include the entire vehicle, not just body and paint. You need to invest in your people and grow their skills. When a car comes in that looks like this picture, it's got both electrical and body damage affected. It takes considering the entire vehicle to solve the problem. You need to grow their skills. You need to provide a future for them. That's what young technicians want. You need to invest in technology and be smart with that investment. Be smart to market, not necessarily first to market. Be innovative, and then serve the motorist, not just the carrier. The motorist is who pays everybody's bills. That vehicle is in your care because it was involved in a collision. When you have the opportunity to do scans and analyze the data that you're acquiring from that vehicle, you have the opportunity to offer that consumer, that motorist, the opportunity to have you service the rest of the vehicle. It's a massive non-collision opportunity that you're giving. And I think moving forward, you're going to hear more conversation around that, at least from me. So your challenge is to put the right skill and the right technology in the right place at the right time. And with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you to see if we have any questions.
Great, thanks, Chris. Really interesting presentation. Stacy Phillips, CIECA's Marketing Director, has been monitoring the webinar for questions. Stacy, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Chris, for a great presentation. How can our attendees in the industry stay up to date with the new automotive technologies?
That's a great question, and it's one of the things that is a skill and a discipline that I created and learned as a young tech, and that is you have to do research, which means you have to read. There's a ton of content that comes across on just social sites, LinkedIn and Facebook, if you want an easy place to find it. But where I go is SAE. I've been a member of the Society of Automotive Engineers for years. You can be an associate member. You don't have to be an engineer to become a member. You can even get access today, I should share. And if you go to sae.org, that's sae.org, and in their publications section or resources section, look for magazines. And you can actually look at the digital magazines, both the Automotive Engineering magazine, which is published, the chief editor is Lindsay Brook, who speaks truth. He will tell you that for battery electric vehicles to scale in the very near future, we'll either have to give them away or charge or tax the hell out of gasoline. He has a great byline in the last or the existing or current edition. You'll also get access to the ADAS Technology magazine, which is digital form. You don't have to be a member. You just click on it and read it, where you'll see new technologies that are being presented by suppliers. You'll see discussions around different propulsion technologies, different safety systems, different radar systems. I wanted to update this presentation, so I went in and grabbed the image of the LunaWave sensor, Lundberg radar sensor that came off of the SAE Automotive Engineering document, or probably the ADAS document, yesterday. I wanted to have an updated picture. It's as simple as that. Investigate that. Become a part of the committees that CIECA has and that CIC has, where you'll become exposed to a lot of the technologies that are just now coming into play, but it requires you to find those and seek them on a regular basis and to read that information to gain that knowledge.
Thank you. Our next question is, how and who can we propose cybersecurity solutions to? OEMs, others?
I would say that cybersecurity solutions can be promoted or proposed to NASTEF or to the Equipment and Tool Institute, who guides, they're the clearinghouse between the OEMs and the aftermarket tool manufacturers. And because cybersecurity is such a big issue, they play a role in that. You can also reach out to the National Insurance Crime Bureau, NICB, who has an integral role with, in partnership with NASTEF and ETI and the OEMs in partnering with trying to prevent vehicles from being stolen. Those would be the resources that I'd suggest. If you can't find those, send what you have to me and I'll connect you. You see my email on the screen.
Thanks, Chris. And Rob Mervin from Aftermarket Matters said, great presentation, Chris, and asked, is industry technology growing faster than government can regulate it, speaking from a safety perspective? Is it becoming the Wild West? Are there cautionary tales, perhaps Tesla?
I think that's a great question, and I will put it this way, that ADAS, and to quote a good friend of mine that works for a competitor, ADAS is not a thing. ADAS is another node on the network. And ADAS was formed out of push from NHTSA to make the vehicles more safe, but it's a technology or a group of technologies that was formed without standards. So the Society of Automotive Engineers was not involved in standardizing terms, products, technologies, etc. And because of that, we have created the Wild Wild West in many aspects. So with respect to the government trying to control it or regulate it, I believe the government can't get out of its own way in trying to regulate the automotive industry because they don't have anybody on staff that understands our industry, and the extremes of the arguments, depending on which way you lean, have the podium, and the truth is in the middle. And if they would talk to the engineers, they would find the truth, because the engineers tell me, just get over the argument, tell us what you really want to do, we can build it, let's go.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's my answer.
Thank you. And Kim Sorlin asked a question in regard to training. Currently, there's education taking place with OEMs and repair shops on not skipping steps and condensed processes. Is there training with carriers as well on the importance of this?
You know, we have conversations just as context of our own organization. We have conversations with the carriers all the time trying to educate them. Somebody made, and I don't recall who it was, in a committee meeting not long ago, that I think it would be appropriate to have an event where we get the carriers to attend as far as bringing education to them. They're invited to all these events like ETI and NASDAQ meetings, et cetera, but they rarely show up. How we get them to attend, I haven't quite figured out the carrot that will drag them there. At the end of the day, it can mitigate total loss. We can mitigate their expense because they're fighting the same battle all of us are. They just happen to have a bigger stick. And we think they have that big stick. Education is the answer. Bringing everybody together, perhaps the ADAPT conference in December could be an opportunity for them to show up in Chicago to listen to the OEMs, the engineers, the aftermarket together to glean a better understanding of the why behind all of this.
And the last question, really what you said leads into this last question. What is the importance of the industry segments working together to address these challenges?
We're at a critical point in our history. I believe, and I've been crying, wolf, that shops are going to go out of business in the next 5 years. I've probably been preaching that for the last 20, and they have been going out of business. But others have propped up because there's no standards in our industry, and so I do not believe that licensing is an answer. I believe cooperation and partnership of all segments of the industry, OEMs, aftermarket service providers, both collision and mechanical, educators, carriers, and all the above, equipment manufacturers, all need to have an equal say in an open forum where they leave their brand and their agenda at the door, and they sit down and have meaningful conversations with outcomes that can be used in cooperation with either legislators or regulatory agencies. Otherwise, if we don't, and this is the fear that I heard from a mentor of mine in 1972, heading to the first ASE certification test when I was in high school. When I asked him why we're going to get certified, he said, quite frankly, to keep the government out of my business. If we don't come together now, NHTSA is going to come down and tell us how to manage cybersecurity, how to manage safety systems, how to, you know, the EPA is going to tell us what power supplies or power propulsion systems we can use to get from point A to point B. We've got to solve this as an industry, or we run the risk of being told how.
Thank you, Chris. Great insight.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Great presentation. This presentation has been recorded and will be available later today at CIECA.com. You'll receive an email with the instructions to get there. I would like to invite you to check CIECA.com for a schedule of future broadcasts and to watch recordings of past webinars. CIECA has partnered with the Automotive Management Institute. Attendees of this webinar are eligible to receive credit towards a professional designation from AMI after taking a short quiz on its website. And again, you'll receive a link to that. Please follow CIECA's social media platforms to stay up to date on upcoming events and CIECA news. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you.